Hello there Scapers, my name is Xenivilius and today brings a couple of really big quality of life updates. The main one you probably all already know about is the Bakriminel bolts update, but more importantly I'd like to start off the video by talking about my personal favorite update, and that is the Aura Bag update. How do you access the Aura Bag? Well, one thing's for sure, it's cleared up around 20 bank spaces from my bank, so I'm very grateful for that. And you simply access it by going to your equipment interface and clicking here, and you can look at every single aura that you own and you can categorize it into different categories. Combat is probably my go-to category, and you can do everything you would do with an aura within this interface. No more taking the aura from your bank, no more wasting inventory and bank space, no more forgetting an aura at PVM. There's no more excuse for not bringing an aura to raids, guys, or any other PVM for that matter. So fantastic update, very easy to use, very intuitive. You can extend it using Viswax as you would have been able to. It's also got a description. You can favorite it, and when you favorite it you're able to click this and open it on favorites. You can hide your warning messages, you can show list view if you prefer that, and when you favorite it, for example I'm going to favorite Manacle and Reckless. Where is Reckless? There it is. I'm going to favorite that. You can right click it over here. You can activate it by right clicking the interface. You don't need it to open up. A very good update. My favorite update of the day, but the one that you guys are probably most interested in is the Bakriminel bolts update. Now Bakriminel bolts are actually bolts that came out 5.5, almost 6 years ago, and they were intended for PvP, and you could actually focus the Bakriminel bolts to target different parts of your enemy in PvP. You still can in fact, but they were not that well used, mainly because they were focused on PvP, and it was around the time that EOC was released. Oh well, not really, it was 8 months before EOC was released, but they became dead content pretty soon. They're also really hard to get because they're throttled. You can't just keep making them. They are time gated every day. You can only cut a certain number of trees every day. But anyway, the update today has increased their value many times to make them potentially the highest DPS ranged bolts in the game. In fact, Ascensions will now be the highest DPS ranged weapons in the game. How does it work? Well, one of the best things about ranging pre-EOC was the fact that Runite bolts could be enchanted with these jewel tips, and once they did get enchanted, they could have a variety of different effects that made them really useful. I personally remember using chaotic crossbows at Armador God Wars Dungeon, using Ruby Bolts E and also Corp. Those were the good old days, guys. Ruby Bolts E were awesome, and then Diamond Bolts. But now these will apply to Bakriminel bolts, so once you tip them, you can enchant them using the normal enchant spells. For example, I'm going to tip the Hydrix Bakriminel bolts. I gotta say, I'm feeling a bit of nostalgia here. This has been such a long time since I used this spell. But enchant crossbow bolt, and after you do that, once you have the right runes, you can easily enchant them. I unfortunately don't, so BRB guys. Okay, I'm back with the runes, and you can enchant it with 99 magic. That will turn it into Hydrix Bakriminel Bolt E. Obviously you can do the same with the others, requiring lower magic levels. I believe these levels correspond to the levels you require, possibly slightly higher than the fletching level you require to actually turn these into gem tipped bolts in the first place. But enchanting them will give them another 5 levels, so enchanting them will increase their levels by another 9, so they'll go from level 90 to level 99. But that doesn't mean they will do equivalent damage to tier 99 bolts. They actually have tier 95 damage, but even then there are no tier 95 weapons in the game. And the way ranged damage works is that the lowest level out of your weapon or your ammo is the damage you do. So Ascensions are tier 90, so the most damage you will get is tier 90 damage. You can actually see this. So if we go to our equipment, combat stats based on our equipment bonuses, go to abilities, you can see it's 802 damage. Now I'll whack on my Ascensions, and that goes up to 1666 damage. Now even though they're tier 95 damage, you can see that if I swap out these bolts for Ascension bolts, which are tier 90, the damage rating will still be the same. That basically shows that your damage rating, your ability damage rating, is capped by the lowest out of either bolts or ammo tier. However, what this means is that it's future-proofing the Solak tier 92 crossbows. Because these are tier 95 damage, they will turn into tier 90 damage with Ascensions, tier 92 damage with the Solak crossbows, and whenever a tier 95 weapons gets released, the combo of these and the tier 95 crossbows, if and when they get released, will be tier 95 damage. However, if there is a tier 96 crossbow, for example, you'll still only do tier 95 damage because this will be the lowest level out of the two. But I think it's pretty cool. It's definitely made dual wield ranged much superior to two-handed ranged. I've seen a lot of Seren Godbow memes on Reddit, guys. Quite funny. But I'm pretty sure they will do something to buff the Seren Godbow and hopefully the Hex Hunter bow as well. But it's now time to enchant the others. Make sure I have a bit of a stock of the others and have a look at what the DPS differences are between all of them and quickly check out which ones are the best to use in different scenarios. They follow a very similar pattern to the old school ones. For example, the Onyx Bolt C. Actually, let me just show you that with the Onyx Bolts E, your damage rating will drop to 1522 because it's tier 80. So the lowest tier between the two is the one that will be used to calculate your damage. But it's time to enchant the rest of them. So tip them first and then enchant them and go ham. I'm going to try this out. Firstly at Yakamaru and Beastmaster Dozag. Let's see how much deeps we can do, guys. For some reason I decided to start with the highest level of these guys, the Hydrix Bakriminel Bolts E. Gosh, that's a mouthful, isn't it? I don't know why, but I did. So let's just do a quick analysis of these. Firstly, you need to know that the global cooldown of abilities is 3 game ticks or 1.8 seconds. However, with auto attacks and bleeds, you can say on average it takes 1.5 seconds per hit. And because these bolt effects proc per hit and not per ability cast, that's what we should use as our base. The effect of the Hydrix Bakriminel Bolts E is that for each hit that you do, it has a 10% chance of triggering the death mark effect, which instantly grants the player 10% adrenaline and an additional 1% from basic abilities for 15 seconds. So, like I said, if we assume one attack every 1.5 seconds, it means the effect actually never dies, and that makes this very OP. If you do the maths, it comes out to plus 1.22% adrenaline per second, or instead of 8% adrenaline for casting a basic ability, you'll get plus 10.2% adrenaline per basic on average, and that makes it really good. In fact, it makes it potentially the best out of all of them, potentially being based on how well you take advantage of this adrenaline gain. Now the OP thing about it is that it is indefinite. Because once it procs, it lasts 15 seconds, and it procs on average once every 10 hits that you do. Assuming you hit once every 1.5 seconds, you'll basically renew your effect every 15 seconds, so it will never run out. I'm pretty sure they will probably nerf it. I hope they don't, but it is a little bit too OP in my opinion. But what can you say? That's what you get for a bolt this expensive. Personally, I used up 19 bolts in one Beastmaster kill, which was about 250k, something like that. Very expensive. I wouldn't use this unless I was going for speed kills or some kind of record or something. So for Yakamaru, I decided to downgrade a little bit using Onyx bolts and Ruby bolts. So the effect of the Onyx bolts is actually very interesting. It has a 10% chance of triggering the life leech effect, which means on activation it will deal 25% more damage, and it will also heal the player for 25% of the damage potential of the attack. Basically, you get healed about what you hit on top of your regular attack with the bolt, i.e. 25% extra, capping at 2.5k life points, i.e. a 10k hit. So if you do the maths with the same assumptions, it comes out to an extra 1.67% DPS. And by the way, these percentages I'm talking about are compared against tier 90 bolts without any effects, i.e. Ascension bolts or Raxxi arrows, for example, but that wouldn't be a fair comparison. Let's just stick to Ascension bolts now. So yeah, 1.67% extra DPS, and the healing effect on average will heal you 750 for every time it procs, which is 50 LP per second. Not bad at all. That adds up very quickly. That's already 10k LP in about 5-6 minutes. Pretty crazy heals, not to be scoffed at by any means, and this is one of the best bolts. Can be very useful assuming you use it at the right time. Personally, I found that the best way of using these guys was while onslaughting, because obviously when you're onslaughting you're hitting quite high, and if the bolt happens to proc while you're onslaughting, you could get healed 2.5k and it won't cancel the onslaught. So this is a very good bolt to use while onslaughting with ranged, because there are very few things that allow you to heal while onslaughting. For melee, there's a Vampirism Scrimshaw and a Berserk Blood Essence. I don't think there's anything for mage, and I don't think there was anything for range until now. Obviously you have the Enhanced Excalibur, which you can use for all styles, but yeah, I think that's probably one of the best ways to use this proc. I also tried out Ruby Bolt's E here. Now, I must admit I misunderstood the special effect of Ruby Bakriminel Bolt's E. It was just so wordy, but essentially what it's trying to say is that the proc chance is based on the monster's LP. Now, somewhat counterintuitively, the higher the LP of a monster, the lower the chance of it proccing, not the other way around. Which is a good thing, I suppose. It is a very good thing, because most monsters, I'd probably say 98% of all monsters in Runescape, are below 1 million HP. So you have the highest proc chance in this case, and if you do the maths, it comes out to a whopping 8.3% extra DPS. 8.3%, guys. That is absolutely insane. And the reason for this is, well, it's based on the assumptions I've made, which you can see here. Average hit is 3,000. Assume the average spec is between 10 to 12k, more skewed towards 10k, so 10.5k, so that's times 3.5 or plus 250% extra damage every 30 seconds, which comes out to plus 8.3% extra DPS. This is by far the best bolt for DPS if you look at it in this way, in this particular situation. However, it will also lose you 23.3 LP per second, which is probably something you can live with if you really care about DPS that much. And this makes it potentially the best bolt. Not very reliable, mind you. It only procs once every 30 seconds or so, but when it does proc, you're going to do a lot of damage. Of course, it also depends on whether you would have done a lot of damage in that hit and how much it would have increased that damage by. For example, if you were in a Death Swiftness, you would have done a 9k damage and that increased it to 10k. Well, that only gave you an extra 1k damage. However, if you were doing, say, frag shot and you were only hitting like 400s and it turned that 400 into a 10k, well then, that's a different story altogether. So it's all based on randomness, I suppose. Also, the higher the LP of the monster, the lower the chance of proccing. So for example, if a monster is between 2 and 3 mil LP, such as the beginning of AOD, your proc chance is lowered to 3%. So your DPS is lowered to plus 5%, which is still pretty good. Again, huge amount of randomness and RNG involved there, but plus 5% is pretty good. And you only lose 14 LP per second rather than 23.3. But how were they at Yaka? Well, it kind of depends. If you don't mind getting hit, then Ruby Bolt's E, of course, are the way to go. But if you do mind, and you do want to heal a little bit as well, then Onyx Bolt's E are great. The problem with Onyx Bolt's E are that each time they proc, you lose the bolt entirely. So the costs will add up a lot, guys. No question about that. The next place I went to test the bolts out was AOD. So as per my original misunderstanding, I thought this would literally be the best place to try out the Ruby Bolt's E, because I thought the effect was opposite to what it actually was. So I thought the higher the HP, the higher the chance of proccing. So I brought Ruby Bolts here as well. I brought Onyx Bolts for the healing effect and seeing how much I could heal with Onslaught. But I also brought the Dragon Bakriminel Bolt E. Now this guy's effect is actually pretty simple. It has a 5% chance of triggering the Dragon's Breath effect, which hits the target a second time for 25% of your current attack as Dragonfire. So what it does is that it adds an extra attack onto your target, provided your target is not immune to Dragonfire. For example, it's not a dragon itself, then these bolts are going to be pretty effective. Also, because the second hit is a magical hit, at least on the hit splat, and it counts as a separate hit, there is no chance of any capping. Obviously with the Ruby Bolts, if you hit a 9k, it would only increase it to a 10k. If you hit a 10k, well, it wouldn't increase it at all. So there was that possibility, but in this case there is no such possibility. It's just pure extra DPS all the time. And if you do the maths, it comes out to plus 0.83% extra DPS. But the thing about this guy is that it's not as expensive as the other two big boys, if you like, Onyx and Hydrix, and it can be used on sort of smaller HP monsters such as AOD's minions. I was using it as a switch whenever we had to attack Reavers and minions. And remember that Ruby Bolt's E are not as effective when attacking a monster below 48k HP. So there are loads of things to juggle like that. I thought it was really good that we were given very specific effects so that we had to make the tactical decision on when to switch bolts, which bolts to bring for which bosses and so on. Especially for AoD, there are so many situations where you might want to use different bolts. Again, I gotta say I was very impressed with the Onyx bolts, especially when I was onslaughting. It allowed me to get 1 or 2 extra hits in, which I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't use the bolts. But I think the best bolts are probably still Ruby Bolts E. At the start of the kill, you will have a plus 5% DPS, again very random, but on average plus 5% DPS with Ruby Bolt C, and then that DPS will increase as Nexus HP lowers with the Ruby Bolts E. Again, a bit of risk involved, a bit of randomness involved, but Ruby Bolts E are very good, no doubt about it. After raids and AoD, I decided to go to Magister to do my Soul Devourer Slayer task, and here I tried out 2 different bolts, Onyx Bolts E and Diamond Bolts. Now Diamond Bolts have an effect which is very useful against monsters which are very tanky, where you don't have a 100% hit chance, where you have a very low hit chance, because their special effect not only gives you increased damage by 15%, but also gives you a perfect accuracy, i.e. 100% hit chance. So if you're fighting a monster where you already have a 100% hit chance, for example Slayer monster, not Magister but something else, then you will only get plus 15% damage per proc, i.e. plus 0.5% DPS. However, if you're fighting a monster where you only have 75% hit chance, so really tanky monsters such as Magister, then your DPS increase goes up to plus 1.78%, and you're guaranteed a hit whenever it procs, which is very good. For that reason, I really like these bolts at Magister, because he is obviously a tanky monster. Usually I wouldn't range Magister, especially not these days. I've been maging him a lot, but this is a really good alternative to maging, provided that you have a reasonably high hit chance to start with, because of course range doesn't have any affinity debuffs, so you have to rely on other things such as auras, prayers, nihils, reaper necklaces, and Diamond Bolts E, for example, to increase your hit chance. In between all that, I went ahead and did a single Nex kill. Unfortunately, I forgot to record it, except the end, but I gotta say, Diamond Bolts E I thought would be the best bolts to use there because of the tanky nature of Nex, but in fact what I didn't realize is that the effect of Ruby Bolts E would be so useful at Nex, especially because that proc will give you a huge boost to phase Nex, to the next phase. For example, if you're soloing it, you're getting a blood siphon and you can't quite out DPS it. You're doing the ice phase, for example, and you're about to get prisoned, but you want to avoid it by skipping it, doing enough DPS, that kind of thing. So until Zaros phase, you will still do maximum damage with the Ruby Bolts effect. After Zaros phase, the effect isn't as useful because her HP drops off, but very good there. Ruby Bolts are excellent there. I should have used them, damn it. And if you really want to go for it, I might bring an Onyx Bolt switch for onslaughting blood phase if you're going to be really pedantic, but I think it's worth doing it because you can get that extra heal in, which will allow you to get that extra 1 hit in. I decided to have another go at Magister, this time with the Reckless Aura, with which I had pretty much 100% accuracy to begin with, so Diamond Bolts were not going to be as useful because they wouldn't have boosted my hit chance any further than my existing 100% or 99% or something like that. So I decided to try out Dragon Bolts here again for slightly increased DPS over the Diamond Bolts, but realistically I think my 2 preferred bolts for Magister are going to be Ruby Bolts until he hits 50k, after which I'd switch out to Onyx Bolts to do the last bit of damage. I think that would be the ideal strategy for DPS. Generally as well, because if you go below 48k, then Ruby Bolts start to lose their effectiveness, so that's sort of the magic number you should keep in your mind when you're attacking a monster and you're looking to sort of switch bolts and strategizing. Legios were my next target, and they were the first sort of boss monster which had fairly low HP, so Ruby Bolts E were out of the question. I had 100% hit chance on them anyway, so Diamond Bolts were also out of the question. It was between Dragon and Onyx realistically. Hydrix obviously comes into the question, but I'm not rich enough to be able to afford a lot of Hydrix bolts. So it was between Onyx and Dragon, and of course Onyx is always going to be pretty good, but again it's a question of price really. And so I think I prefer the Dragon ones here. Now, as I was doing Legios, I was thinking about the Hex Hunter bow. If you watch my Hex Hunter bow analysis videos, you would have known that this is probably the only realistic scenario anyone would use the Hex Hunter, apart from maybe Slayer. And I was planning to keep my Hex Hunter just for this. I need 3 more pets from here, so I was just gonna keep my Hex Hunter for this. But what I'd like to do in the next video is to analyze these numbers in a lot more detail and figure out which is the better DPS at different places. Of course, that will depend on whether the Hex Hunter bow gets a buff or not. But with current figures, I'm planning to do a bit of an analysis, not just at Legios, but everywhere else. But yeah, Dragon Bolts would be my favorite here for the reasons I just stated. And last but not least, I went to Raxxi, my good old buddy, good old pal, Raxxi. Paid him a nice visit. And I was alternating between Dragon and Onyx Bolts again. No Ruby because, well, I could have used Ruby between 150k of each phase, but I thought it would be a bit too much of a pain. Dragon Bolts again were consistent, but not outrageous DPS. Onyx Bolts were again very, very good, especially in P4 where they would give me some random heals while I was rapid firing inside Death Swiftness. I was like, yes, this is awesome. So my verdict for Raxxi would probably be to bring Ruby Bolts if you don't mind switching at 50k, if you can remind yourself to switch at 50k, and Onyx Bolts if you need the heals. But essentially it's between Dragon and Ruby at Raxxi. And if you do not have accuracy auras or overloads or things like that, and your hit chance on Raxxi is pretty low, then in that case you can try the Diamond Bolts, but I wouldn't use them because generally your hit chance on Raxxi is pretty high with all the usual DPS gear. So that brings us to the end, and one final thing I want to mention is that if you have done the Elite Seer's Diary, you have a flat plus 2% chance of bolt effects activating. So for example, if your original chance was 3%, it would go up to 5%. So you multiply all the values I mentioned by 1.67. If it was at 5%, it would go to 7%. So you multiply by 1.4. If it was at 10%, it would go to 12%. So you multiply by 1.2. So pretty simple. In fact, it's a massive incentive to go and do that because proportionally you get a massive DPS increase for completing these tasks, and you don't have to wear the Seer's Headband. As long as you've completed the tasks, you will get the effect. You can probably tell from this video that I'm very, very happy with these updates. One, I'm a big fan of Ranged, and I'm extremely glad to see that Ranged has received these buffs. I like the tactical aspect of having to choose between bolts for PVM. I also like the fact that they've revived a really old piece of content that was dead and weaved it into the game in such a way that people are really going to enjoy using these. Of course, the elephant in the room is Seren Godbow. I'm hoping they give it a buff. I'm pretty sure they will. Also the Hex Hunter bow, because they are severely underpowered compared to their dual wield counterparts after this update. But as I said, I'm hoping they will buff that. And there were quite a few other little patches apart from these big updates, so I'll put the link to those in the description below. I really hope you enjoyed it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like me to do a full-on analysis, and if you have any ideas on what I should analyze in particular, please feel free to tell me. I would love to do it. You know, I really like my analyses, so I'm gonna go into that later on in the week. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one.